Hey everybody, Dan Keldsen from Infocap AI. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Infocap, and I'm the host of Next Future Today. And today is a special episode. This is the reboot of Next Future Today. And given the role that I have now and have had for about the last 6 months at Infocap, which is all about human-centric automation, this is the perfect topic. Craig Le Clair is my guest. He's VP Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. He's been there for a little over 18 years. We have a very similar sort of early stages of our career, which is interesting, and a reasonable amount of divergence, which is, I don't want to talk to somebody who's exactly like me. That seems kind of pointless. So I want more perspective so that I can learn and hopefully you can learn. Craig's latest book, he's written many and plenty of research reports that you can get through Forrester, but his latest book is Random Acts of Automation. And unlike a lot of books that have come out in the last year or two since ChatGPT and all of the LLM world has come about to popularity anyhow. It was around before, but this is less about the specifics of, fill in the blank LLM from Anthropic or OpenAI or Google or yada, yada, yada. You can find those details elsewhere. This is really more about what is the impact of automation. This could be physical automation, robots that flip burgers. It could be digital automation and robotic process automation or intelligent process automation or digital process automation or BPM or any number of things that roll up into that. But it's really about how does automation broadly, and then specifically in the purely digital realm, I will say, how does that impact 4 different classes of workers that he outlines in the book? And what do you do about that? So do you just sit there and take it? Or do you do what I would recommend? The point of Next Future Today is to always be learning, paying attention to what's coming down the pike at you from the future and deciding how you're going to react to that. Dodge and weave, change your careers, get new skills, change the way you spend. We cover a lot of topics in this interview, and anything that we don't get to, there's plenty in the book, which is wonderfully accessible. And again, I think it's more, I wouldn't say it's timeless necessarily, but it has a much longer, very useful shelf life. And I think you're going to find both this interview and Craig's book as a nice guide on sort of a pragmatic realist, or I call it pragmatic futurism, on how automation is actually happening in the world and what are the ramifications and how do you deal with that. So without further ado, let's go. Craig, it is so nice to talk to you again. It seems like I'm pretty sure I interviewed with you a long time ago, but so great to see you today. And I'm jealous of the temperature of the atmosphere outside of your abode. I'm 40 degrees or so less than that at the moment, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And thank you, Dan, for doing this.
I wanted to get in touch with you because I saw you at the keynote at UiPath, which was about 4 months ago, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. It was October. Yep. Now we're on January.
But as I was listening to you do your keynote, I said, oh, that's right. So he shares a love of puns. There's some subtle in-jokes that only certain people are going to get. But one of the things that I really liked was that I call this, that I'm a pragmatic futurist. So I'm very interested in what's coming down the pike. I want to be on sort of that front wave of things, so I'm aware of what's going on and how I might take advantage of it, or my clients might take advantage of it. But I also want to get things done today. So I don't want to just be, the future is far off and I'm never going to do anything about it. I'm just going to comment on it. I want to be able to take advantage of it right now. And it seems like that's the kind of view that you have on things too, because you're not just in the prognostication business as an analyst, but Forrester has clients who have businesses to run right now.
Exactly.
that need help, right?
If you can't help them, you're not going to be in business very long at Forrester. So yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So I don't know that, I think during that keynote, I think you mentioned some sort of phrase like that you associate with yourselves. I don't think it was pragmatic futurism, but it was something kind of like that. Am I just imagining things there?
I'm not pulling up the words exactly that you might have heard. I mean, I use the word constructive ambition, but I use that in the context of guidance for workers. But I try to be very, very practical. In other words, we can talk about agentic systems and all of that, but there's a stepping stone that has to do with trust and other things as we push these AI agents into the workforce. And that's what I try to focus on, is how do people get started? What do they do next? And what's real out there, versus what's all the discussion and narrative.
And so, happy accident. You actually mentioned, and I ordered while I was sitting there listening to you, your new book, which is now out.
Oh, thank you.
It's almost out. It will be out.
It will be out in a couple of days. I actually just got my first physical copy of it. which
Yeah.
probably looks
And
backwards.
it's soft bound.
And
Yep.
yeah, no, I think that, I wanted it to be available to workers, right? So I definitely wanted to go with a very affordable copy, a paperback version. So, and it came out
Yeah.
beautifully, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and it's obviously it's very timely. I mean, one of the things that it's a great title, which is half the battle or more. Right. If you're going to stand out, wow, what does that actually mean? That sounds terrible or wonderful. It depends. Did you iterate on other ideas there that got shot down by the publishing committee or
No,
something?
actually,
Or is this
everyone seemed to like it. I mean, and I had a research series at Forrester under the title Random Acts of Automation, which, Forrester's reports are
okay?
behind a, expensive paywall and basically are
Right.
geared towards to how to help businesses, right? But I
Yep.
basically took the Random Acts of Automation from that and used it as a title, but with a focus on workers and regular people as opposed to helping business do what they do better. So
Right.
I always like the title. I think the subtitle gives it clarity, but I think you're right that just the Random Acts of Automation does have a certain intrigue with it. What does that mean? Is it positive? Is it negative? How bad is this going to be?
Right.
And that is of interest, today. Very much so. It's an area that we need to have the right discussions, and hopefully this book will generate some ideas for those discussions. That's kind of the point.
I think you wonderfully sidestepped one problem that for anybody that's writing a book right now about technology, which is if you're covering generative AI, for example, every single day something new just happened that blew away everybody's concept of what happened in the last 10 years potentially. So, you're instantly given the timeline of getting a book out there, you're instantaneously obsolete, which is not good.
Right, and that is something I struggled with the idea. I mean, essentially any book you write about that has technology as the main focus is
Yeah.
obsolete on the day it's printed.
Right.
So this had to be more about the character of the sort of technology engine that we've devised over decades and decades, and how it speeds
Yep.
out innovation after innovation. And you're right. You look at these large language models; they're getting updated, almost biweekly. But when you turned it towards the workers, and you turned it towards how can this be a blueprint for workers to deal with the changes that are coming? They're
Mhm.
generic enough, and not just so generic like get better communication skills, but very specific.
Right.
But
Yeah.
they're ones that have legs, because the type of
Yep.
innovation we're going to see in the workforce is going to come, even though we're talking about agentic systems, and it's going to come gradually. So I think
Yep.
the book has legs because of its focus on specific skills and different worker categories.
Yeah, and that's totally in line with that's how I've always thought, and I'm very happy that I finally came up with the Next Future Today tagline for my podcast. My original podcast was Biz Tech Talk, which among other things was hard to say fast and somewhat hard to type on a smartphone.
Yep.
Although that was actually a year before the iPhone came out. So
The title on my last book, which came out 2019, was Invisible Robots in the Quiet of the Night, which
okay,
was also, that got, that was considered a very good title for what it was trying to do. The scope was very
Mhm.
narrow. It was around this RPA industry that was growing, madly. And everyone was talking
Right.
about, physical robotics, doing backflips and taking jobs. But reality was these robots you didn't see that were running in some cloud that were starting to
Yep.
erode that that worker in the back office for that 12-minute ERP update that they were doing.
Right.
So,
Right.
I was just going to these conferences. I was speaking at these conferences, and there'd be thousands of people there talking about building RPA bots, and no one even knew what they were. So I just wrote this was a simpler book, 130 pages. Focused just on really more the intelligent automation market, which was stemmed out of the
Yep.
RPA world. But anyway, that's the
Yeah.
past. Now we're at 2025, and we're talking random acts, right?
Well, I'll have to pick up your previous book because that's definitely that's in my realm too. You cover a lot of ground in the book. I do think it's wonderfully accessible, so it doesn't you don't have to assume that people know a ton because you use very plain language, which I certainly appreciate. That's
I'm glad to hear
it's
that.
so easy to fall into gobbledygook that normal human beings don't know what the hell we're talking about. Which is not what I'm trying to help people. I don't want to baffle them necessarily. Or if I do, I'm doing it on purpose, not accidentally. So I think I mentioned this. So my career in this space started with this book, The Workflow Imperative. which is by Tom Qualquis, who is still the CEO of Delphi Group. And little did I know that 31 years later, I would still be in this realm that I didn't even know existed until the moment I set foot in the company. He gave that to me as a wedding gift.
Really?
Which I think was awfully generous of him. Yes.
Wow.
There was cash inside of it too, but it's so I went to Berklee College of Music, so I studied. I was going to be a rock star. And so I turned to be hopefully a rock star in business and technology. We'll see how history writes it for me. But at the time, I was like, okay, why would I know about workflow in back offices? Because those are not classes at Berkeley. I had no experience in that. But that was 1994, and here we are. It's 2025, and there's still so much that that you and I and other people who've been in this for a long time have forgotten about, that most people still haven't heard about.
Yeah, I agree.
So if in the length of time that you've been both a Forrester, and you started in IT, I believe, right?
Yeah, I started in IT. Actually, I was an economist when I got my first professional job was as an economist, but then I got kind of sucked into the tech industry and working in Washington D.C. Yeah.
Okay.
So my background's more more modeling and statistics than it is actual coding and software development. And I think that kind of helps me try to reach a narrative that can be understood by others. Sort of that nexus between the extension of the technology and the actual technology itself. Yeah, it's been quite an adventure, and a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this workflow technology, business process management, we're now calling digital process automation, and now they're basically the orchestration engines for agentic processes. All came from imaging and workflow and content management. Those were the first. And I remember going to an AIM show. There were 1,000 demos of design services for building processes. None of them worked. They were all just demos.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of really how we build processes, how we revise them, how we understand them, how we document them. And we're still trying to figure it out. And now you have Gen AI, which is going to come in and basically allow us to have a human interface with an environment that will, paint a picture based on a prompt of a process. And we're seeing that.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just a fascinating time, a continual learning curve, which I'm really happy about.
So after all this time, what surprises you about what people don't get, or just they haven't even begun to get? What's possible, or what is a sort of sane approach to digital processes as opposed to anything else?
So one thing that surprises me is that we're still trying to predict the effect of automation on jobs in terms of number of job losses. And I think we've proven that we really can't do that. That if you look at the the economists, there's sort of three camps that have a view on the future of work. And the economists have the richest data set, and they say we always never get it right. We always say jobs are going to be lost. They almost never are. Automation creates new jobs. Everything will be fine. And then you have the dystopians that, see the robots coming out and taking over the streets, have a sort of a Blade Runner approach to the world.
Yep.
Again, a dated reference that few will get. And then, of course, you have the tech industry that basically is all positive about everything technology, right? So they're, it's going to add, what does McKinsey say? It's going to add $4 trillion to the world economy. And, of course, they'll need a lot of consultants to help do that.
Yeah, so they're safe.
So, it surprised me that no one has really focused on the fact that it's not going to be about job loss. It's going to be about how the shifts in the types of jobs will occur. And that's what random acts of automation does. It basically says there's 4 types of workers that you can genericize. There are digital elites, which, by the way, now, are seizing power in Washington, D.C., right? In terms of the, all the tech people that have supported and helped get Trump elected. You have the middle workers, which are probably the most vulnerable, which they've always been for decades due to globalization and other things. But now a lot of these AI agents are coming in, are going to really directly attack what they do. And then you have what I call human touch workers, which are basically everything from healthcare workers, but also people that work in factories and so forth. And then I think there's going to be a significant number of people that are dropping out. I'm calling them work-life pioneers. And I'm not calling them dropping out as a negative implication, but they're going to be a growing set of people that are going to ratchet down their consumer behavior, and they're going to choose jobs that align more with their goals in life and their morals.
Yep.
And they're going to, reject kind of the W-2 type of work elements.
Mm-hmm.
What I try to do in the book is to first, for each of those, outline in simple, understandable terms the technology trends that are going to affect that group, and then say, what do they need to do about them? What are the specific skills? How do they get to a better place? If you're in the middle, how do you become an AI operator to be able to take a job that formerly was only the province of more credentialed professionals? Because now you have AI to help, equalize that.
Right.
Gen AI has passed the bar exam. You don't need a $600 an hour lawyer. I mean, the pyramid function for a lot of law firms of the future are going to be just a few licensed attorneys and then a lot of supercharged paralegals. There are many analogies that provide an optimistic path, for the middle workers to go as they become eroded. There's 28 million contact center workers today in the U.S. How many do you think they're going to be as Gen AI starts to have this conversational intelligence that allows a real conversation, a real human conversation? They're going to be moved to mid office and back office functions and greatly reduced. So there has to be a blueprint for workers in these categories to move around. I'm surprised that there hasn't been more written about that or more specific advice that deals with the disruption and changes in the workforce. And forget about this, the dire predictions of automation, loss of jobs. We really have blown that every time we try to do it. And I've done some of those models and they've all been wrong.
So I started out in IT, and then because Delphi was a analyst firm, and we did consulting and we ran events on portals and knowledge management and intranets and all those terms that don't exist anymore. Part of the reason I became an analyst is I kept overhearing conversations that our consultants were having about security. And it would go something like, and security is very important. Next slide. But I was the guy responsible for security. I was like, are you kidding? What? That's all?
That's it.
I don't know what the rest of it is that you do for consulting, but if that's the treatment that they get with our consulting for security, which is arguably the most important piece, if you bothered to care about whatever it is you're protecting, then they're doomed. Can I be the one that talks about this, writes about it? And it's the same thing with, I think a large part of what you're getting at is change management. So if, like the economy doesn't change just for no damn reason. There are things afoot, and the impact that it has on you or your business, you should take an active role in managing that change instead of saying, oh, we need to do change management, which is usually, we're not going to bother to do the work of caring whether anybody is going to use this hugely expensive investment we're about to make.
Change management.
And not think about all the details.
Yeah, so I have pretty strong views on change management, but basically I don't think it's, I highlight that as something that business can do. After talking about what the workers need to have, autonomy and self-determination, take control and do all these things. That's basically the spirit of it, is that don't wait for the government to fix this problem. Business will not fix this problem. They're going to continue to do what business does. So you have to fix it. And so here's how you fix it. But the last chapter, I talk about what business can do. And I do talk about how a new way of change management needs to occur, which was really built around this notion of big functional changes and a big M&A. There wasn't change management directed at the effect of automation on the worker, right? Which is more ongoing. It's not a singular event. So there needs to be, change management needs to be a skill that's embedded in middle management and the executive class at companies, and not something where you have this separate office that comes in with a standard APGAR approach, which really was built around kind of events that occurred in the 1950s. So anyway, that's my bit on change management. The thing that I really focused on, among other things, was critical thinking, which I think is a discipline that's can be applied, and it, in a sense, we're all here today because of critical thinking. There was, I don't know if you know this story, but 1983 there was a Soviet lieutenant colonel who was in charge of the nuclear codes, and basically he got a message that the U.S. had fired 5 nuclear missiles at Russia. So his protocol was to launch a full-scale attack, nuclear attack. He applied critical thinking. He basically said, what, if they were going to attack us, they wouldn't just send 5 missiles. They would do more than that. So I think this is an error.
Right.
And so he checked around, and it was this weird, sort of atmospheric and sun and solar, created the error. But I think you can apply critical thinking in almost for each of those the three categories really. Even if you're working in a warehouse and you're observing the new robots coming in, I mean, being able to assess what they're doing well, what they're not doing well, how they can work better with humans. That's the kind of thing that'll get you promoted or keep your job, right? So critical thinking, which has normally been associated with the digital elite as something that only knowledge workers can take advantage of, I try to dismiss that notion and say it's BS. Critical thinking can apply to middle levels and human touch workers just as effectively. And we need to have more specific, more domain specific research in critical thinking. But I think that's an important element. I think there's very specific things. A lot of these sort of service workers or the human touch workers, they can avoid. If you look at where automation is being invested in the different industries, and I have an adoption map for physical robotics. So you can see that some industries are investing in automation that's going to make the workers safer, that's going to make their job better. Like janitorial robotics has really made janitorial services a lot better place to work. So I basically suggest that's a better area than food service, to go into. Right?
Yeah, right.
Similarly, security, robotics. There are very good career options there for folks that are starting to coordinate and manage a force of android security officers and robotic dogs and things like that. That's going to start happening more and more, and those jobs are going to be better as opposed to food processing. In the warehouse, forget the warehouse. The robots own the warehouse already, and we're just trying to stay out of the way. So that's kind of advice.
Literally.
I try to get into the meat of these jobs and try to and try to figure out what are the guideposts for different, again, for these different categories of workers. So anyway.
Well, one of the things that's definitely different about you and I is that you pay much more attention to the physical automation world than I do. I've been focused more on the purely digital
automation
realm.
And I have too, mostly. I really just got into physical in the last 5 years to really have balance and looking at the full workforce, because cognitive really affects the middle and the digital elite more than those that are working with their hands, because it's really about human agility versus robotic agility. And now with the, I just did a blog this week on NVIDIA's first large language model trained for the physical world, so you start to put an LLM inside a physical android and robotics, and now so it's starting to happen where we're going to see a lot more of that. So I'm glad I kind of jumped into it when I did. But you're right, we've both been on the cognitive train for a long time.
One of the things I've been talking about that drives me insane. I've been an analyst. I've been hands-on, owning systems. I've been a consultant. I've been in lots of different roles, and I know for me, like talking about the impact on workers, I've always tried to go out of my way that if you actually value the people that you're going to enhance or maybe replace certain things that they do, level them up, for God's sakes. I mean, there's if you think that there's anything to culture, that there's any value in culture, then you shouldn't just blow it away, because you can save a buck, But that takes a different lens, and it drives me insane. There's clearly, public markets, investors, they want instant returns, right? And they don't want things that an investment that's going to not pay off maybe ever, because ROI studies are a joke. It's the short-term thinking largely overrules. We could thoughtfully design a path that takes us from here with a certain percentage of our workforce to do away with the stuff that I call, and you appear to call, we're effectively treating people like robots anyhow.
Yep.
Well, they shouldn't need to do that stuff. That's what our, RPA or whatever flavor you want to call it these days. That's part of the point, is get away from, like, I used to have tendinitis because I would practice 6 hours a day on a piano, and I had a part-time job, and between typing and playing piano, I'm not doing good things to my hands.
Exactly.
And that was actually part of my accidental fall into through a temp job. I was replacing temporarily a woman who went on maternity leave, and it was very just secretarial work. That's when I found out about the wonderful world of mail merges and macros. And instead of hand typing a bunch of things, I could do like the day's work in about half an hour. And she was kind of surprised when she came back
I'll bet.
at how
I'll
different her
bet.
job was, but it was much easier. It's not like she loved doing that. So her world got changed for the better. It turns out she was slightly nervous. Then they upskilled her, and then I moved into a different area. I got hired permanently, and I did more of stuff like that because I would say, to your critical thinking point, why are we doing this way? It was a pharmaceutical food company. It's not like I knew a damn thing about pharmaceuticals or what is pharmaceutical food, but I would just ask, why I see that you're struggling doing this thing. Why are you doing it that way? Well, that's how we always did it. The phrase I've come to hate. What can we do to get people to become aware that there are these opportunities, that they're not decimating jobs. They should be, subtly or not, leveling up from an individual standpoint and,
Yeah. Well, it's
from
really,
the
I've
organizational
struggled with
standpoint.
that question for quite a while, because you look at all the people that work in cubicles, and in
Yep.
most of those cases, an AI agent will do a lot of that work. And
Mhm.
you can talk positively about moving out of those cubicles and moving to better positions, more strategic work, and so forth. The reality is that most of the people in those cubicles are high school graduates, and they're not going to stumble out of that cubicle and become a strategic thinker in finance and accounting immediately. So the
Yep.
reality is there's going to be a numbers problem, right? So there's going to be a significant number that move from that middle to the human touch worker categories and to the
So sort of down the
down.
hierarchy.
Yes,
Yeah.
there are going to be significant numbers. I think there is an optimistic path for middle to move to digital elite by becoming
Yep.
AI operators and embracing, as I talked about before, embracing AI to level set on the credentials that they don't have.
Yep.
But I think the numbers reality is that there's going to be many more going into the gig economy. Many more I recommending, and I have great examples of people that have created side hustles and side gigs that have been very, very effective in balancing out their work, where maybe one partner has a W-2 work to get benefits and the other one is doing various things. There's going to be a lot more work-life pioneers.
Mhm.
And that's not a bad thing. I think that when you're in touring around France, the first thing that people talk about isn't what they do for a living. That's
Yeah.
not the first thing they talk about. And well, that in
Yeah.
the
Right.
U.S. it is. We've
Yeah.
for too long defined ourselves through our occupation.
Yep.
The sommelier was sophisticated, and the cowboy was tough and rowdy, and we've always had these associations, but more and more, I think the positive spin is that we start to think more inwardly about what we really are, and start to project that out and become more comfortable with a persona independent of any occupation or work.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that work-life pioneer category is going to grow. And it's we're already seeing society accepting that much more. I mean, it used to be,
Uh-huh.
when you and I were young, if you didn't have a job and people and you said you were a consultant, people would look, they would just look at their shoes because they didn't want to look at you in the eye. I figured you were just unemployed, right?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
now it's getting more and more accepted. You probably played the game of
Yeah.
life when you were a kid, right? And there was no space that
Yeah.
said, you know, uh, uh, you know, gig driver with UBI support. you know, again, too old a reference, but we're changing, and I think the pandemic, like the giant sequoia trees, where forest fires is a bad thing to talk about now with LA, but
Yeah.
you had this sort of reawakening of our kind of moral neurons at some level, and people are starting to say, you know what, my life could be shorter than I expected, you know. And
Right.
let
Right.
me take a fresh look. Let me do a restart, and let me see what I really value in life. And it may not be
Yeah.
that in basket that employer that probably is going to look at you in terms of robotics and replace you in 2 years or 3 years anyway, and they may be
Right.
replaced.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this
It's
this loyalty of companies that you used to have was not there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because part of that is loyalty's two-way, or at least two-way. So expecting this loyalty to a job when the job is not loyal to you is kind of not cool in my opinion. So here's a funny small world thing. So reading through your book, Guy Kirkwood came up
Oh yeah, Guy.
as a work life pioneer, and I actually before I started Next Future Today, I had left a startup and was consulting, and I was looking into RPA because UiPath had become a $1 billion, a unicorn out of Hungary, which is very rare. I was like, oh, so I should pay. Let me dump back into process stuff again, and because I like to learn and I like to have interviews like this, I've reached out to a guy. I was like, hey, you've worked at UiPath for a very long time. Would you be interested in talking? So I talked to him right before he made the switch to becoming a farmer. It both confused me, and it was interesting because on my mom's side, my grandfather was the 6th generation of farmers in southern New Jersey.
Oh,
So my mother was a farmer's daughter. That stopped with my grandfather. My uncle did not go into it. Yeah, that's not a great business to be in America as a small. So it was interesting to see because there's so much that has changed about how you can farm.
Right.
Some of which is kind of scary and not enough thought put into it in my opinion. But there's a lot of cool stuff, like using drones or satellite technology to understand how to
Absolutely, yeah.
harvest grapes, right? There's lots of really
Automatic
interesting
feeder
stuff,
for
which
your
has been
cows and horses. This little technology
Yeah.
things you can do to make it a lot easier. Yeah.
But I think it's funny. I was like, oh, I actually know I know guys. That's how cool is that? And as you point out, though, in that book around the work life pioneers, it's not that this isn't just for rich people, basically. So I don't know what Guy made when he left UiPath.
I'm sure
He probably had a nice little nice little mountain of cash.
Yeah.
I would assume.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about that, because it does seem like to be able to afford to do that, you definitely there's probably a bunch of things you need to rethink.
David White was probably my favorite work-life pioneer.
Yep.
He was the one that, started a think tank around foster kids. And he adopted a child
Okay,
from
yeah.
China, he and his wife. And when he was holding the child, he said, you know what, this is what moves me. This is my passion, children. And then he noticed that the foster care kids moved
Yep.
on the average 3.5 times in their early lives before they launched as an adult. And they would put their belongings in a garbage bag, and so he got all the major luggage travel program, those guys, to donate luggage to the foster care, entities, and then just left his strong job, on Wall Street to do that. Now, you're right that, and I struggled with this, that you looked at Guy and you looked at David, and they had financial means to do that. But I'll talk a lot about Nick Mullins, who is a 5th generation coal miner that I met in Kentucky. My wife's from Kentucky, so she took me on a tour of all the places you don't go in Kentucky and Appalachia, which has such bad
Okay.
PR over the years. You had the Dukes of Hazzards, and you had Beverly, and you just had all this. Well,
Wait, that's bad?
well, they were good.
I
They were
love the
good
Duke of Hazzard.
series, but you get that impression of not the intellectual capital of the world, basically. And it's been destroyed by the coal companies. They've done strip mining, and it's all the water's polluted. It's just and now the coal industry is down to 15,000 employees from 300,000. So it was nothing for people to do. The education's so Nick Mullins, was a coal miner who now has a blog called The Thoughtful Coal Miner, and talks about how to transition. So if you can transition workers in Appalachia, you can do it anywhere. And so we talk about the cultural issues of trying to, in the mines when people work, and this is something people don't get about workers in these certain industries. They go, well, how could anyone do that? Well, there's a certain camaraderie and a strength of the connections you make if you're working underground, with others that you can't replicate.
Yeah.
He tried to work in a call center, and the call center, even though he made more money and didn't have to deal with the dirt and the black lung and everything else, the danger, it just didn't work for him because you lost this bond and community that you had. So that's what we don't understand when we try to talk about workers doing different things. We don't really dig into into the cultural aspects. really well. But here's an example. He's an example of somebody who did transition,
Right.
to by really ratcheting down his consumerism. His big thing was, in the interview I did with him, was we're just forced by massive advertising to buy things, a lot of crap we don't need, and we are just, we could lose 3/4 of things we have and still have more than the average Canadian. And of course, we don't need all that stuff. So, I know we have this idea that we have to keep this 80% or 70% of the economy is based on retail expenditures, but really, we got to stop focusing on just endless growth, of the economy, and look at the value of people in their lives. We need a different way to think about life, and that's what the work-life pioneers are figuring out. And I think it's a very interesting group to watch.
Yeah. Well, we're going to run out of time here shortly, so a couple things that I like to ask. So the point of Next Future today is just like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago or 80 years ago or whatever timeline you want to pick. That's you can't go back in time. So the next best time is right now, and that's always been my sort of goal with the Pragmatic Futurism is to help people see that I survived the journey by getting shot in the front and the back, and I lived to tell the tale. And here's some things that you could actually take advantage of now that they're probably safer and less expensive for people who have not really wrapped their heads around this. From a worker perspective, what is, aside from buying your book, which I would definitely recommend, what's the date? Yeah, buy two now. What would you recommend they do to get thinking in the right? Maybe they've been overly negative because we're getting pounded with negative. I mean, let's face it, negative news all the time about computer generative AI, especially is it's gonna take your job probably tomorrow, and you may not even know that you're not even doing your job anymore.
Yeah.
So,
So the one thing I would
how
leave
should we?
workers with you're going to need grit. And I talk about a woman who wrote some really good book about the role of grit in dealing with transition. And you're going to need what I call constructive ambition. Don't get intimidated by the extension of AI. In other words, set your goals to be slightly higher than where they are now, so that you don't get the anxiety of having to try to achieve things that are going to be too difficult to achieve. So if you're an Excel jockey, think about Tableau. Don't necessarily think about dealing with advanced data science and machine learning to do data visualization, right? So have that kind of boundary, but constructive ambition. And it's about, last thought is, it's got to be about you. I mean, don't expect the government to solve this problem. In fact, what you're seeing, the reason all these tech entrepreneurs have sided with Trump is because they started to look at what the government was planning to do in treating AI much like the way we treated nuclear technology in after the war, and putting these really amazing controls on it. And they said, you know what, that's going to just starve our innovation in the tech industry, right? So that's why they're all now former Democrats are now Republicans and supporting Trump, right?
Right.
So don't look to the government to solve this problem, but there are things that you could do as an individual to take control, have constructive ambition, and a bunch of grit. That's what you're going to need to really succeed going forward.
No, that's great. So I think that, Random Acts of Automation, great book. I'm looking forward to getting my physical copy. As much as I'm a digital guy, I don't feel like I'm making progress when I'm reading a book digitally, because nothing, it's still.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
My Gmail is actually easier. It's Craig Le Clair at gmail.com. But my Forrester email is cleclair at forrester.com. So either one of those, if you want to get in touch with me.
Craig, great to talk to you again. Really appreciate. I'm glad I got an early copy of your book, so I could jump on it and help with your launch. I hope that goes fantastically.
Thank you, Dan.
And
appreciate
really
it.
enjoyed this. It was great.
I enjoyed it too.
Awesome.
Great to talk with you.
Great. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.